Hi, and welcome back to the program. In this video, we're going to look at loops. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file and save it as loops.py. In the past, we've looked at variables such as my variable, and that is the word hello, for example. And I've also spoken about how Python doesn't know that this is a word or a phrase or anything. All it knows is that there's the letter H, followed by E, followed by L, followed by L, followed by O. So surely if Python knows that this is a sequence of letters, we should be able to access that as a sequence too. So we should be able to access each of the characters. And indeed, just as we could with a list, we can do things like print my variable 0. And what happens when we do this is that the first element gets printed out, the H. So let's go to the terminal and run this file. And as you can see, the H gets printed out. This may remind you of the syntax we use to access the first element of a list that we did in the last video, or the last couple of videos. So what if we wanted to print out every letter of this word? Well, easy enough. We do this, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 letters here, so we start at 0 and end up in 4, and we print them all out, right? Fair enough. However, let me tell you that this is not very good code because there are many things repeated over and over, and it just doesn't really generally look very nice. And also, if we increase the size of this string, then, well, we have to just add more lines really to print everything out. Not very good. So instead what we can do is we can iterate. We can go over each of the characters in the string. So what we'll do is we'll say for character in my string, print character. So this is a very common construct. It's called a for loop. And basically what happens is we say character is a new variable, and the first time we run this line of code, character is going to be equal to the first element of this variable, my string, the H. Then we're going to run the body of this loop, which as you know is indented because there's a colon there. And then after we run the body, we're going to repeat. But the character is now going to be the second character, the E. And then we're going to run the body and then we're going to repeat, but then it's going to be the L, and so on. So character is just another variable that gets assigned to each of the elements of this variable. My string is called an iterable. And you can do this iteration, you can go over each of the elements of any iterable. And iterables are strings, lists, sets, tuples, and more. So you can do this thing here for strings, lists, sets, tuples, and a few more things. Okay, so let's run that, really. And of course, we get an error because, my bad, this is not called my string, it's called my variable, of course. So let's run that again. And you can see we get HELLO. It's a very common mistake, but you can see that we got a traceback, just as usual, and we got a name error saying that the name my string was not defined, as it happens all the time, really. So nothing to worry about there. Do notice that this makes sense. It makes sense to say for each of the characters in my variable, do something. But it doesn't have to be called character. It can be called as. It can be called anything you want. And this is the variable that is going to keep track of each of the elements. It doesn't have to have a sensible name. It's just a variable. Okay, so we've mentioned that other things are also iterables. So we can do something like my list. There's going to be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And then we can iterate over this list for number in my list. Notice how after the colon, as always, we indent. And we're going to print number times 2. And I'll use this opportunity to let you know what times is. Maybe not something you'll use too often, but nevertheless something specific to Python. And what that means is multiply to the power of 2. So what we're going to be printing is 1 to the power of 2, 3 to the power of 2, 5 to the power of 2, and so on. So let's run this, and what do you think is going to come out? Testing your maths here. And you knew it. We get hello first, then 1, 9, 25, 49, 81. Nothing new there. So we've looked at the for loop, and the for loop is this construct that lets us iterate over an iterable. Lets us run something a number of times equivalent to the length of the list or the length of the string. And the variable number is each of the elements of that iterable. However, there's also another type of loop, a loop that we can run while something is true. So for example, say we ask the user, do you want to print the number 10? And they'll say yes, and then we can print the number 10 out, and then we can ask them again if they want to print it, and they'll say yes, and then we can print it again, and then we can ask them again, and so on. The crux there is that we're printing the number 10 while the user wants us to print it, and as soon as they want to stop, then we can stop. So user wants number is going to be equal to true, and then we're going to say while user wants number is equal to true, and notice there is a double equal sign. So what we're saying is while the user wants the number is exactly equal to true, and this is different from the single equal because here we're not changing the value of this, we're just comparing it. So we're going to compare user wants number to true. We're going to say print 10. So if we run this, what do you think is going to come out? Maybe you should run this in your computers as well, although that may be a bit risky. It's still printing out, and it will keep printing out essentially forever, the number 10. Why? Why does it print it constantly? Well, we've not told it otherwise, really. We've set a variable to be true, and then while that variable was true, we're printing, and really it's never stopping. It's never not true, so it keeps printing it out. Notice how true is orange, just like the numbers, because it's a special Python keyword. However, we can set user wants number to be false, which is the opposite of true, and then this will no longer be true, essentially, and then it will stop. So what do you think is going to get printed out now? Nothing? Well, we get a bit of gibberish there. Hello, 1, 9, 25, 49, 81, which is this my list printing, and then we get 10, which is our 10 there. I'm gonna, for our benefit, comment those things out, and then save it and run it again, and we just get our 10. Okay, so let's actually ask the user if they want to stop or continue. So what we're going to do is we're going to say user underscore input equals input. Should we print again? Yes or no? So what is this? What's this input thing? This is new. It is new. What we're going to do now is we're going to print this to the screen. This is a parameter to the input method. And the input method is going to print this out and is going to wait for us to write something back. So after this gets printed out, we're going to be able to write something, and whatever we write is going to go into this user input variable. And then we're going to say if user underscore input is n, then user wants number is false. So what happens here is we've got another thing, which I'm going to look at in the next video, which is an if statement. And the if just allows us to do something if this comparison here is true. So if we write the character n, then this will be n. N is exactly equal to n, so we will set this to be false, and then we won't run this any longer. But if we enter anything else that is not n, then this code here will not run. So we will not set user wants number to false, and therefore we will run the loop again, and we will ask the user again, and so on. Let's run this just so we have a bit of an example. But when we run it, we're actually going to get an error that we have not created. So let's run this first, and I'll explain what the error is. So the first thing we get is 10, because user wants number is true, so the first thing we do is print 10. And then we get this should we print again, y or n. If we put n, then this if statement should be true, and we should change the value of user wants number. So let's do that. Let's type n. And then we get an error. What's this? Well, I don't know if you guys remember from before, but we encountered an error that said, essentially name error, name n is not defined. And that was at the beginning, when we called a variable the wrong thing. Basically, the variable didn't exist. So what this is saying is, the variable n doesn't exist. This doesn't make sense. Surely we want n to go into user input. And that's because input is not the right method to use. And that is because if you type Python -- version, you can see that I am running Python 2.7. If you're running a Mac, you will have the same problem. Python, as a command, is always Python 2.7, so you have to run Python 3.5, as I have mentioned earlier, and then loops.py. So now we will work, and when we type n, we just stop the program. If we run that, but we type y, then we do it again and again and again until we stop. So just an important bit of information. If things are going wrong that you think should be going right, maybe check the version, make sure you're running Python 3.5, and you can run Python 3.5 like that, as we have seen in the past. And just make sure to do that, because these two are some key differences between Python 2.7 and Python 3.5. In this video, we've looked at iterables, which are strings, lists, sets, tuples, and a few others, and we'll get to those later on. We've looked at the for loop, which lets us iterate over each of the elements of an iterable, and we've also looked at the while loop. We've also looked at what true and false are, and we've looked that we can make comparisons between values by using the double equal sign. We've also looked at the input method, which lets us retrieve some input from the user as long as they're running Python 3.5, and we've also looked at the if statement, which lets us execute something if this thing here after the if evaluates to true. So basically, if this variable here contains n. A lot of things to be looking at. Please do download this code that is linked in the resources. You can download this code and have a wee look again, have a play with it, and then move on to the next video. So I'm really excited to see you there.